Yep.
On the bed?
Well, it was. No, it wasn't eating it on the bed. Ah. Okay. So we've got two viewers. Hello. Good evening. My name is Matt Damour.
Is this a test?
Well, it's a test in that I'm testing it, but I'm also live.
What? So these people can hear me?
Yeah, they can hear you too. Okay, so we got a couple of questions here. We'll get to your questions in a moment. My name is Matt Damour. I'm from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. And I'm going to be talking in a little bit about a demonstration that took place, a protest in downtown Montreal. Talking a little bit about that. We've got some questions here. How's the weather? Snowing. Yeah, it's snowing. Well, it is Canada. So, question here. Try moving the camera around so you can see outside. Can you see? Oh, it stopped snowing. All right. Hi from Singapore. All right. So, first thing I'm going to do here is check if... Yes. All right. I'm live on the internet. Fantastic. And Twitter has been advised that I'm live on the internet, which is also good. And let's see if Facebook knows that I'm live on the internet. These are the important questions that I'm trying to answer up front. Yes. Okay. It's all good. So, I'm going to start talking about this issue proper in a little bit. So I'll give a little bit of background for the people who are watching live right now. My name is Matt Damour. I'm a journalist from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. I am a staff reporter and live streamer for the Link newspaper.ca. Check out our website. And also a live streamer for an organization called 99media.org. A lot of the live streaming that I do is actually live streaming of protests in downtown Montreal, and there are a lot of them in Montreal. So that's just a little bit of a background for who I am and what I do and why I'm live tonight. But specifically, I'm going to be talking in a little bit about the protest that took place last night on December 18th. It was a nighttime protest, anti-austerity demonstration. That's a sort of the typical protest that you've had as of late in Montreal. It's against the Quebec Liberal government's austerity agenda. A lot of people, a lot of university student-aged people take to the streets and sort of make their discontent known about the current economic and social policies in the province of Quebec. So that's a little bit of background. Currently we've got 3 live viewers, so I'm going to wait until there are more people. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, comments, or anything, put them in there. I will do my best to answer in good time. We've got C'est moi saying hey. Hey. Yeah, and if I'll say it right now, I might get a phone call while I'm live, and it's actually going to be from a radio journalist at CJD 800, and he's wanting to speak to me about what happened last night, because I was there, and I did witness a lot of what was happening, and they're wanting to get a little bit more perspective on events for a live radio report, so I'm going to be doing my best to provide some context and some details that I got from my reporting. So yeah, bear with me. I'll get started properly in a couple of minutes, and I'll wait to see if anybody has joined and specifically has some questions, and then we'll get started. But in the meantime, please don't be shy. Put something in the chat. I've got some pizza, so I'm going to be doing that, eating pizza as we're going. So somebody was asking about the weather early on, and it's actually the experience that I've had the most on this this new service, InstaLively, is the second you go live, somebody is there to ask you what the weather is like where you are. Which I'm happy to answer that question, but I just think that's quite interesting. Of all the potential questions that one could ask right off the bat, how is the weather? I guess it's a classic, so I can understand that, definitely. Okay, so let's begin with a little bit of background on what happened last night in downtown Montreal. It was an anti-austerity demonstration. You could attach a couple of other labels to it: anti-capitalist, anti-police brutality. Take your pick. There were a lot of different issues at play. Stuff that was communicated on social media the actual before the actual protest started. People talked about, okay, we're upset about the austerity agenda in Montreal. We're upset about the treatment the protesters have gotten from police in the last few demonstrations. So we've got our first question here. I'll get back to describing events, but this might be a good jumping off point, actually. So we've got a question here from Olivier. At which moment did police intervene yesterday during the protest? I would say that the earliest intervention that we had was probably, I'd say, about 10 minutes into the protest. As the protest moved south from Place Amélie Gamelin, Berry Square, you already had a large riot police presence on the ground, which is typical of these kinds of events. They were not yet walking alongside the protest, and in fact that didn't happen at all last night. The riot police did not get very close to the protest, but they did block off an intersection, and at that point I think a couple of protesters had set off some fireworks, and some people already wanted a confrontation with police at this first intersection that had been blocked off by police, and I believe one rock was thrown, but then some backup very quickly arrived, and again this is 10 minutes into the protest. Some backup arrived, and more riot police strengthened this line, blocking off an intersection. So I'd say that would have been the first quote-unquote intervention. There was obviously much more to come. So about, I'd say, 10 to 15 minutes later, the crowd made its way back towards Sainte-Catherine. And at that point, we heard some popping noises, so I ran to the intersection to see what was happening, and you had a line of riot police officers who were blocking off westward access to St. Catherine. If memory serves, I don't remember exactly what street it was, but I think it was the intersection of Saint Timothée and St. Catherine. So the riot police officers were blocking the westward access to St. Catherine, and protesters moved off. And at first we heard what sounded like maybe firecrackers or perhaps some more fireworks being set off. But very quickly you saw this streak of red light move towards the riot police officers. So I got a little bit closer, but not close enough to, put myself in a position where I thought maybe I would be in some danger, but close enough to see what was happening. And basically, flares were being fired at the riot police officers. And at this point, you've got a line of maybe a dozen to 20 riot police officers who were holding the line. And at first it was confusing because usually these things are thrown. Maybe the fireworks are launched in the direction of police, or maybe somebody will throw a stink bomb or a firecracker or something like this. This was a projectile flare that was surprisingly well aimed at the police officers. And at that moment, I didn't actually know this, but looking at some footage that was captured by CTV News, they got some footage from the other side of the street to where I was, and he zoomed in his camera, and you can actually see a protester with what very clearly looks to me like a flare gun. So I would say that was the first big intervention of the evening. And I just want to stress that point, that the protester had what looked like a flare gun. And the reason I underline that is it speaks to how organized this protest was. What you got in terms of feedback from some of the more militant protesters after the last few evening protests, people were upset that the groups didn't remain very cohesive, they weren't necessarily very organized, and that once the police got close, people scattered and ran all over the place, and it wasn't very well organized in that regard. So there was a lot of chatter coming up to last night's protest where the protesters were saying, look, we have to stay organized, we have to stay in a group, and there was even stuff being said on social media about, bring rocks and things like that. So you knew going in that this was going to be a hot and heavy protest, that the police were not going to be messing around, and neither were the protesters. But it just goes to show that, it was very well organized on the protester side, because you had somebody bring what appeared very, very clearly on that footage from CTV as a flare gun, and fired, I believe, 3 or 4 of them at police. And the police responded first by firing rubber bullets. So that happened. And then after about the 3rd or 4th flare that was launched in the direction of police, they actually, at that point, fired off some tear gas in their direction, and the protest then ran eastward on St. Catherine. So that's more or less where things lay with the police intervention. So I see that there are some more people coming in. I'm going to leave a little bit of space here if anybody has any questions or comments. I'm going to wait for those to come in, and I'm just going to also try to make sure that we are live and everything is good. Okay, so we've got a comment here from B2T Charlie. Just want to say I admire your work. You always cover every event, and I think you're doing a fantastic job. Keep up. Thank you very much. Very, very kind. Glad to get that feedback. So yes, for those of you just joining us, the title of this live stream is Let's Talk About Last Night. And as such, the subject here is to talk about the events that transpired. And it's actually getting a lot of media attention. I guess I'm not surprised. But I was really discouraged last night because a lot of mainstream media outlets put out their sort of quick hit articles, and for the non-journalists, like a quick hit is it is what it sounds like. It's get it out there, give the basic facts of what happened. And unfortunately, when you do something like that, you inevitably miss a lot of details. And the kind of information that I was seeing in these quick hits about what happened were very, very bare-bones stuff about, there were X number of arrests, police launched tear gas, a couple of people were injured, and there was something in there about a police media spokesperson had told, I think it was the CBC, that some protesters had been injured while running away or running during the protest, which that may have happened, but I mean, it doesn't really speak to a lot of what happened last night. So we've got another question here from Olivier. How many protesters approximately? I would say at its peak when it started, it was maybe about 200. I've seen a lot of outlets say 100, but I'd bank on it being a little bit bigger than that. So there were about 200 protesters at the start. Those numbers dwindled relatively quickly, specifically once this whole business with a protester firing off flares at police transpired, and police responded by launching tear gas in the direction of the protest. At that point, a lot of people scattered, and it didn't remain a cohesive group. So I'd say that at its peak, it was probably about 200, and then slowly dwindled to about 100. And then at that point, once you have tear gas that's fired off, and the riot police officers start charging with the shields and the batons, then you start having pockets, smaller pockets of protesters that are running all over the place because they're trying to get away from police. Question here from Gabby Nishjorik. Hey Matt, there's awful feedback. Also, what do you think this means for the protests going forward? Yeah, whenever I'm asked the question about what's going to happen going forward. Oh, hold on, we're getting word that there might be some audio feedback. All right, let me see what I can do about that, if anything at all. Anyways, we'll see what we can do. I'll have a listen later and see what the sound is like. I'm using a new app, Insta Lively, and checking to see how it works. So going forward, right now I get the sense definitely that the people who are still going to these protests are maybe protesters of the more militant variety. These are people who are going there with their faces covered, and they are not afraid in many situations to, start confrontations with police, and who will sometimes throw projectiles and, like we had yesterday, fireworks and flares and things like that. I'd say that a couple of different factors, just the fact that it's getting colder is going to dissuade a lot of people from taking to the street. But I do get the sense that there's this sort of concentrated group that will remain in the streets. Maybe not at the same frequency that we saw in the spring or in the fall, but it's not the same kind of sort of populist protests that we saw, where you've got people of all ages coming out and participating in these protests. It's really more of like the university-age, more militant protesters. And in terms of, I mean, going forward, each successive protest that I've been to, and that's taken place over the last 3 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, the police response has gotten stronger and stronger, and they've had the sort of the straw was short every time in terms of what the protesters did and how police responded to it. Interestingly enough, yesterday I didn't hear a P6 announcement. There was no loudspeaker announcement saying that it was an illegal gathering, or that there was no big order to disperse. The order to disperse was riot police charging, and at that point you knew, okay, well, this party has become illegal in the eyes of the SPVM, the Montreal police. So yeah, going forward, if there are more protests, these groups having these kinds of protests, I think it's going to be smaller groups, but definitely dedicated people who feel quite strongly about the cause and are going to respond in kind, and maybe with less frequency. But again, if last night was any indication, even with 100 people, downtown Montreal was absolute chaos. If you were around that, I mean, people were looking at it and they had no idea what was going on. They were running into restaurants on St. Catherine to get away from the tear gas smell and all that stuff. So, yeah, that's my long/short answer to that question. I'm going to wait for any more questions, comments. And we'll get into it a little bit later, but there's this question about the presence of undercover police officers posing as protesters. That's a biggie, and I'm going to try to be as careful as possible when discussing that, because a lot of this stuff is still unconfirmed. The Lynx news editor, John Cook, was able to confirm with media spokespeople at the SPVM that there were what they refer to as sort of plainclothes officers that were in the protest. So we at least have confirmation that there were members of the police force walking inside the protest and who were not dressed in police uniforms or riot gear. So we'll jump off from there and talk a little bit more about those details and what went around there. But it's going to be a little bit tricky to talk about in absolute terms, because it was a very hectic and sort of weird situation last night. So I will wait for a little bit, gather your thoughts, ask your questions. I've got some pizza. I'm going to eat some pizza. And I've got a beverage here. You don't even need to ask about last night. How are you doing? How are things? How's Christmas shopping? It snowed today in Montreal. How do you feel about that? The tough questions. Ooh. Sorry. Tablet fell over. So, while I'm waiting for some more questions to come in, I will point out that there was some concern online about the health and well-being of some of the members of the independent press, because there was some stuff going around on social media that some members of the independent media and student press got, in some cases, whacked pretty good by riot police officers. There was one photographer for 99 Media, Dylan, who says that he got hit with a baton in the back 3 times as the riot police were trying to move protesters and press back. But at this point, I don't think that there were actually that many protesters. It was mainly media. I definitely held back once I saw that the police were getting a little bit more aggressive. So fortunately, wasn't the subject of any sort of physical confrontations with police. But Dylan, from what I hear, is fine. Nasty bruise. John Cook, the news editor for the Link newspaper, actually followed three, I believe, of the alleged Montreal police officers who were undercover, and Brandon Johnston, who was taking some photos that evening, got some great shots of some arrests that they were doing. So keep in mind, you've got these supposed protesters who are in, jeans and hoodies with their faces covered, who then grab a protester and handcuff him. So it made for some very good images. But at one point, one of these alleged undercover police officers, again, hard to tell because they don't have badges, but when they're arresting people in the street, you can sort of come to certain conclusions, ran after John Cook, and there's this incredible image, I'm not sure if it's on the Link's article about this, but of John Cook just booking it, trying to get out of the path of this undercover police officer who's charging at him. And there were some other sort of alleged incidents about, well, not alleged, I mean, there is video of it. Rick Fournier from 99 Media got some footage of people coming up to these undercover police officers, identifying them as such, calling them out. And at one point, these undercover cops took out pepper spray canisters and started spraying some people. So there was definitely some stuff like that. There's, again, unconfirmed at this point, but there are some people who are saying that there was an incident where a gun was drawn from an undercover cop. Multiple people are saying that who were in the protest, and a couple of eyewitnesses, but I didn't see it myself, and I'm not sure that any journalists did. But we'll certainly be following up, and I know that the mainstream media is following up on that big time. There's a La Presse journalist who's trying to find some contacts and trying to get confirmation on that. So we've got another question here from Olivier. If I noticed an evolution in the attitude / strategy of the police officers since I've been covering the protests. Well, I mean, this round of protests I've been covering since the spring, last spring of 2015, and it's an interesting question in terms of the evolution of their response. I think that it would be unwise to make a sort of blanket judgment about how police respond in protests, because there are so many different kinds, attended by so many different kinds of people with different causes and varying degrees of sort of militant fervor behind them. So, I mean, in the spring, a lot of these protests, while you did have a couple of standoffs, let's say when a riot police line would block off a key intersection, there would certainly be situations where people would get in the face of riot police, but that never really escalated beyond that. So I don't know if you could take that to mean that the police were a little bit more patient, but certainly as protests go on, and let's say they happen weekly, so from week to week, I mean, that's certainly been the case in the last few weeks. There's been one every night for the last 3 or 4 weeks, I believe. I would talk about that evolution, because what happens when they transpire from week to week is that the police get less and less patient, and they will either deem the protest to be an unlawful gathering sooner, or they will simply have the riot police officers charge at protesters and try to disperse them a lot more quickly. And that's certainly what we saw last night. The riot police officers became a lot more aggressive in standing their ground and charging at protesters within about 10 to 15 minutes. And of course that was sort of exacerbated by the fact that some protesters were throwing things once it got to St. Catherine and launching flares and things like that. But yes, in terms of the evolution, I'd say on a long enough time frame, it remains relatively constant, but the evolution that's notable is in the smaller time frame when there are multiple protests in a relatively small time frame that are recurring, and that you can definitely see the pattern of police becoming a lot less patient and more aggressive. So I hope that answers that question. We'll wait for some more comments to come in. Again, trying to get a handle on... Oh, okay, alright, so we've got some people who are also in the YouTube chat. So there's the there's the Insta Live chat, and there is the YouTube chat. So we've got Not Complicit saying I'm late. You're not late. You can come whenever you want. What did I miss? Is this a one-way conversation, or do you converse? I love conversing. It's one of my favorite things to do. Conversing while eating pizza. Cheers. So yeah, hopefully about last night's events. If you have specific questions about that, I would love to answer those. And it seems that I answered Olivier's question. I'm grateful. I'm happy to hear that. Aside from my favorite thing is conversing, my second favorite thing is conversing in a coherent manner. If I can pull that off well at night. Alright, so we've been at this for 25 minutes. So I'm going to get into this business a little bit about when the protesters started identifying the alleged undercover police officers, because I think that was an interesting moment, and it all happened very quickly, and it led to some alleged assaults by undercover cops against protesters, and one person was taken away in an ambulance, and yeah, there's some stuff to talk about. You know what I'm going to do? I got some feedback here that there might be some weird tinny noises coming out of, because I'm just streaming from my tablet right now, so not the highest quality microphone you're going to get, but I do have a lapel mic. Yeah, I've got a lapel mic. I think it's going to work here. Bear with me for a moment. I'm going to plug that in, and you are going to tell me if it works and if it sounds better. 1 second. How are you doing?
Good.
Good. All right.
How many viewers do you have?
Right now, not that many.
Call your friends, viewers. Come watch.
Yeah. Share, like, and subscribe, or whatever it is that people say
On Twitter
on these
and
things.
social media.
Yeah,
Facebook, LinkedIn.
Yeah, let people.
Whatever.
Yes, let people on LinkedIn know that you're watching the stream and to come join the party.
All the people, the professionals.
I'm gonna clip this lapel mic on. Works. This is low rent, guys. Seriously, this is the first. It's like the second time I'm using this service. It's a Lively, which so far I'm enjoying. I solidly this. So let me just clip this on and plug it in. Off smartphone mode. So yeah, this is designed for smartphones, but I don't see why it wouldn't work with the tablet. Okay. Check 1 2. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, and is the audio quality better now that I have this plugged in? I will wait for a response. You can tell me, and in the meantime, you can also put in any questions or comments about last night's anti-austerity demonstration. Just waiting for the comments to come in. Can you hear me? So, person saying here, we can hear you, not a big difference. Okay, whatever. I mean, I'll leave it plugged in, and we'll see how things go. High pitch thing is the same. Yeah, so I'm thinking that, okay, it's clear, but the high pitched is the same. So I'm thinking it's probably just the, whatever sound capabilities the tablet has, regardless if it's the onboard mic or an external mic. So we'll stick with this, and maybe I'll try speaking a little bit more softly. Maybe that will remedy things a little bit. Okay, so interestingly enough, I just noticed that the Montreal Gazette posted about an hour ago. Concordia student injured in anti-austerity protest has a lawsuit pending against police. So I would encourage you to go check this out, because I can see here, so this article is identifying the protester who was injured and taken away by ambulance last night, Katie Nelson, she's well known in the protest circles, and she's gotten some media attention, specifically regarding the actions that she's taken against police. I know that she's got a lawsuit pending. So I think that that's a good jumping off point to talk about what happened with these alleged undercover police officers. So I was walking along, minding my own business. No, not really. I was minding everybody's business. So I was on a street corner, and the riot police were sort of chasing down protesters, and this was just off of St. Catherine, a couple of blocks north. I don't remember exactly what street it was. But riot police officers were sort of chasing down different pockets of protesters, and I heard one protester run by, and I just overheard something like, he's an undercover. And I took that to mean that, that there was suspicion that there might be some cops in the protest who were dressed up as protesters, and sure enough, that was borne out, and that's exactly what was going on. There were about 3 undercover police officers who were identified by protesters. What happened then, again, I'm going to try to be light on the speculation, but I'll tell you what I saw. Riot police officers circled about, I'd say, 5 to 6 protesters. They kettled them, effectively. But it was a very weird kettle, and in fact, one protester just sort of walked out of it. And she was really confused, because she'd been in a kettle before, I believe. I think she said that. And she was just kind of weirded out by the fact that the riot police officers let her out of the kettle, and just sort of like moved aside and let her out, which doesn't happen. If you're kettled, you'll usually stay kettled until a ticket is issued to you. So that was the first sort of warning sign for me that things were a bit off. And then we heard that a protester had been injured. And when we looked into this, we noticed that this was happening in the same vicinity as this kettle, so the two things were connected. When we got a little bit closer, what ended up happening was the kettle just sort of dispersed. The riot police officers let everybody through, and there was one person, I don't know if he was a protester or media, but he had a camera. He had a sort of DSLR video camera, and he was shooting stuff at the protest. And I asked him, what happened? Why did they let you through? And he said, I don't know, they just said if you want to go, you can. So I've never heard of a kettle ending in that particular manner. And then he also said that he saw, again, this was an eyewitness, he didn't hear about it, he says that he saw that somebody who was dressed as a protester shoved Katie Nelson, this other protester, very hard, and that this caused her to injure her leg, and possibly her arm or her hand. I'm not 100% clear on what the nature of those injuries are. And then he added that there was a suspicion that the individual who had shoved her was an undercover police officer, that she had identified a police officer dressed up as a protester, and that police officer responded by shoving her. So that's all we know. There is, again, I can't confirm any of this, so it is it's speculative at this point. But multiple sources reported seeing these undercover police officers pull their firearms out, so that they had guns and that they pulled them out. It's possible it was dark, so later on we do have video confirmation of these undercover police officers pulling out canisters of pepper spray, which they did use on certain protesters. So I can confirm that happened, and it is a possibility that these pepper spray canisters were mistaken for firearms, but multiple people have said that they saw a gun being drawn, and sort of media outlets right now are trying to get to the bottom of that. La Presse, CJD, CTV, I know, are looking into it, and they're trying to find people who actually saw this. So we did have, the Link newspaper did have one source who identified a police officer taking a firearm out, so we'll see if that goes anywhere, but as for right now, we don't have confirmation of that. But if you are interested, I would invite you on YouTube to find Rick Fournier. That's R-I-C-K for Rick. Fournier is Fournier. R-N as in November, I-E-R, Rick Fournier. He was live streaming as I was last night, and he actually got some footage of protesters coming up to these undercover police officers and identifying them and sort of shouting, undercover cop, undercover cop. And they did take out their pepper spray canisters and just drench these guys. So that did happen, and we do have video proof of that happening. But anything else at that point, yeah, we'll see about that. So any other questions or comments, put them in there. I will do my best to answer. Again, I will repeat, there might be a phone call that will interrupt this live stream, but I'll stay live, and you'll get to hear me talking to CJAD radio reporter Taylor Noakes about last night's events. I'll be offering my insights and perspectives on the events as they unfolded. So I will wait for a little bit, see if any other questions come up. Well, that's very nice. Somebody messaged me with a short clip of me. So let me just listen to this, because I'm hearing that there was some weird feedback. Let me have a listen.
About an hour ago, last year's protest has a lot.
Oh yeah, I can hear that. Okay, yeah, there's like this weird, tinny, sort of high-pitched noise. I apologize for that. Next time I do this, I'll probably stream from my phone. So I did a test stream a little bit earlier with Insta Lively with my phone and listened to it, and there wasn't anything like that. So, yeah. Thank you for the feedback. I appreciate it. You need a little bit more pizza in the meantime? Don't mind me. I'll tell you one thing about last night, though. I got some good cardiovascular workout from it, running around, and of course the obligatory tear gas, nasal cavity detox. I'll take care of you. If you've got cold and flu season is coming, folks, and it's a surefire remedy to clear the tubes with that stuff. Burns, but also clears the nasal passages. Okay, so we don't have many questions coming in. We don't have that many viewers, I'm sorry to say. So I'm probably going to cut off the live stream in a little bit, but in the meantime, you got a couple of minutes if you'd like to ask any questions. I'll do my best to answer them. And I do also have to keep in mind, it is bloody Saturday night, so people are out, having lives and doing things, which I'm very clearly not doing.
Right.
I did go running today. Did a little 10K up on the mountain. That was nice, pleasant. Nice clear weather. Got a good view from the lookout. And while I'm waiting, I'm going to have a little bit of fun here. I'm going to try these video filters that I can change in real time. So that's the rich filter, natural, rich, I don't know, black and white, distinguished, I like that. The nighttime cam, it's not creepy at all. I am interested to see if this will legitimately illuminate the scenes in poorly lit conditions during a nighttime protest, but I get the feeling that that's maybe just for effect. So we'll see about that. What else do we have here? Vignette. Ooh. Classic. Romantic. What else do we have? Mirror. That's terrifying. Cool. Alright. Bulge. This is getting silly.
Yes.
Yeah. Sketch. Ooh, I like this.
Can you explain to your viewers what is a kettle and how does a kettle usually go down?
Yeah.
Because I do not know.
Okay, so we're getting, let me, hold on. Before I answer that question, cartoon!
Okay.
I'm a cartoon.
Maybe that's why I don't have many viewers.
Alright, back to natural. So, good question from off camera, from my lovely fiance.
Hello.
Asking, what is a kettle? And how does it usually happen? Because I did say that. I did say that there was a kettle, and it didn't go as it usually does. So a kettle is when a group of riot police officers will close in on a small pocket of protesters, usually a small pocket. You can have a mass kettle where maybe hundreds of people are sort of blocked off. So what the riot police officers will do is encircle a group of people, and then they essentially become stone statues. They will not move. You're not getting out of there. And the reason why you've been kettled typically is that you are going to receive a ticket for whatever infraction or offense that you're accused of committing, and they don't want you going anywhere. So it's sort of, I think strategically the reason they do it that way is that it's easier than sort of cuffing each individual person or putting them in zip ties. They're just sort of maintained in this small perimeter of riot police officers surrounding the protesters. So that is a typical kettle. And in terms of why the one I saw last night was very different is that specifically for that reason that people were actually getting out of the kettle and not forcing their way out or sort of sneaking out. Police officers were stepping aside and creating an opening in the kettle, in the perimeter of riot police officers, which that doesn't happen. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
All right, good. That answered the question.
It's a little bit like when you're herding sheep.
It's a little bit like when you're herding sheep, yes. I think that metaphor would probably upset some of the people who have been kettled, but I mean, it's the same principle. It is about sort of just keeping people contained in one location and putting them where you want them to be. So, yes. All right, and with that, we're not getting any more questions, so I'm going to call it a live stream. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for the lovely people at the beginning who asked me what the weather was like. That was very thoughtful. Thank you for everybody who asked a question and who joined us on a Saturday at 8-ish p.m. I'm sure you had better things to do. You most certainly did. Thank you for watching. Again, this is all very experimental. I'm sort of trying to expand my live stream offerings, and not limit it to just live streaming from my mobile device during protests. I want to do a little bit more interaction, analysis, things like that, and just expand my live streaming horizons. That's mainly what I'm interested in doing. So thank you very much for watching. Follow me on Twitter @MattD'Amour. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. Like, subscribe. Go check out my cupcake recipes that I'll put up at some point. Cat videos. Movie trailer reactions. What? I can't believe that's going to be in that movie. All those things are going to explode? Whoa! And so on and so forth. So thank you. Thank you for watching. Good evening.